شيء مبروك.
بارك فيك.
Good to see you, Bashshar.
We are already on a high, even having a green tea here.
Green tea for celebration.
Yeah.
We decided we would celebrate a better way later. This is my idea. I actually kind of ambushed you today. I wanted to catch you before the holiday, in the last episode before the break, to talk about things we've spoken about in public and in private. And I want to begin with your words. This is just 2 weeks ago. You were certain the end of the Assad regime was near. And I think you may have even said it's a matter of days before the regime goes. It's already after the opposition captured Aleppo. They were on their way to Hama, and this was midweek. And I could see it in your eyes. You meant it. You were certain. You were adamant. And I wasn't. I was on the other end, thinking that it's impossible to see the end of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. You traveled. What is it, like 4 days later, maybe? Saturday night, we're hearing news of Assad's departure and that Damascus was taken. And then by Sunday it was confirmed Bashar al-Assad was in Russia, and celebration began in Syria and of course here in Lebanon. And I immediately thought of you because you were so sure that this was going to happen. And I wasn't. And I think that's just the added value of longevity and maybe having really a sharper eye on developments in the region. So, well done.
I must confess, I'll disappoint you with my answer. I mean, I rarely get it right with predictions. I failed and failed and failed. And I think the reason why I fail is that I'm carried by my hopes. And generally, all my bets about what's going to happen in Syria in the past have failed. And I got, rationally, given what the past, it's rational to be a pessimist. Pessimists tend to win in this region. And I'm not learning from that. So my hope, actually, my wishful thinking made me this prediction. But it happened to be right, Sometimes, even if you don't have a method, you get it right sometimes, Even broken watches get the time right twice a day. So I got it right this time, not because of any insight, but because what I wanted to happen. Of course, there were signs of it. It's not like I wasn't totally just like dreaming. It's not a fantasy. In light of what's happening in the region as well, the fact that, Hezbollah was hammered here, so they could not provide support. They could not be there for them. The fact that the Israelis were in the sky watching over any attempt for reinforcement, not because necessarily they want the attack on the rebellion's attack on Homs and Damascus to work, but because they don't want any weapons being moved through Syria to any place. And of course the Russians being involved in the Ukrainian war. But the defeat of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the realization that Iran is a paper tiger, and this is what's always my view. It was never been confronted really by serious forces, and when Israel started to do that, they showed their what they are exactly, and this made it like it might happen this time, with this advancement, with the collapse of the Syrian army, with the lack of support. They took them by surprise, NSA, because you have a hollow state, you have a weak army, you have tired allies, and you get them at that moment, and they were hoping this would not happen. Nobody will discover how unprepared they are for any kind of attack. But this happened, and unfortunately, it was the right timing, and I think maybe the Turks knew that, and they timed it in a way that it's really optimal for them to give the green light to the Hayat Tahrir Sham to start their attack. But yeah, I was driven by my desires rather than by my rational thinking. And I'm happy I was lucky.
I'll explain it from my side why I was driven by desire, yet not able to see the outcome that you saw, which was inevitable. I did not see the reluctance from the Russians and the Iranians to really step in. Meaning, I did not anticipate literally little to no aerial support from Russia. I really thought Iran would get more involved. Not necessarily through Hezbollah only, but just military support in general that did not really add up to anything at the end. I thought Russia and Iran were going to save their friend, Bashshar al-Assad. I thought that they did this for the last 15 years for one particular reason, which was to preserve the Assad regime, not to let it crumble before them. And in 2024, it seemed like it was inevitable that they had lost trust, that they turned against him to a degree, and that they were simply not interested in Bashar al-Assad. But that became clear to me on Sunday. It wasn't clear to me in the days leading up to it. Would you put the onus on that is the real reason why Bashar al-Assad quit Syria?
Well, there are many reasons. Of course, definitely that they were not able to provide the help they used to provide is a vital one, because he could have survived it and at least survived, if not in Homs and Daraa and other places in Damascus, and because of the borders with Lebanon as well, they could supply them with the support, and also in the coastal area where you have the Russian bases and all of that. He would definitely have wanted that. I don't think they have let him down as much as they couldn't help him. It's not like there's abandonment. He's still a vital, at least for Iranians. Maybe not as vital for the Russians. For the morale is not good because they're losing grounds and they're losing part of their success stories. This part of their success is being damaged, and therefore they might be scared that this might affect their morale in the Ukraine. But not to that extent, it's their fight is of different nature, and they could, afford to lose in Syria and not lose in Ukraine, unfortunately. But I think for the Iranians, this was vital. Loss of Assad, loss of Syria is more important than the losses they had in Lebanon, with the exception of Nasrallah himself.
More important.
Yeah.
More important than the losses here.
Yes, with the exception of Nasrallah. The military losses can be recovered if Israel started to become less attentive to the situation. They can stay, they smuggle weapons at a slower pace, they provide money and money, but all has to come through Syria. And now with the Syrian regime is out, they've lost almost everything they have built. And this will have probably a domino effect, in the sense that instead of the big stone falling and the rest fall, it's the small stones falling, and then the domino effect goes all the way back to Tehran.
I'll get into that a bit deeper later, whether or not this really reaches home for them. But do you see that as a domino effect still playing out? In other words, that Iraq could be next. Do you see that as a likely scenario?
It's very likely. Iraq is a more problematic for the Iranians even before that. The Shiite community in Iraq are not enamored by the Iranian presence for all kinds of reasons. We don't have to go into them now. Unlike the most of the Shiite community in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen.
Yeah.
These are minorities, not tiny minorities, at least in Lebanon, that use the Iranian help to become the dominant powers.
Yeah.
The Shiite in Iraq are not a minority. They can get their prime minister from the Shiite community without the Iranian help by sheer votes. They have the oil, or most of the resources are in the Shiite south, and therefore the Iranians become a burden on them rather than a help. I'm talking about general sentiment. Now, of course, Iranians have managed to capture the state to some extent through their militias, but not to capture the hearts and minds of the people. And the moment they see Iran weakening, they will jump back to their anti-Iranian posture, including people like Muqtada Sadr, who was deprived from getting his own prime minister because of the Iranian influence, and he had to lose all of these forces, including the Marja'iyya, the Sistani, who in Najaf, who would also regain his posture. He already has a lot of power there, but now with the weakening of Iran, he will become more and more powerful. So I think it's difficult for them to maintain their posture in Iraq after all what happened. Of course, things might even be worse for them if the regime starts to show weakness and fumbling through his external projects. It might affect their position in Iran itself, and one can not be surprised now if there's something happens, especially if there's a Israeli strike on nuclear sites. That would show the weakness of the regime internally as well, and of course with the sanctions still there and maybe strengthened with the Trump administration, they are in a bad shape now. I mean, they are really panicking, I think.
Okay, we'll go deeper into Iran and the region towards the end. To circle back to the last stretch of the Assad regime, how would you describe what was left of the regime prior to Ahmad al-Shara or Julani's sort of rapid, in a way, almost like instantaneous takeover of geography? And Aleppo in itself was a huge accomplishment. How would you describe the regime? Was it a fait accompli that this regime would never recapture the rest of Syria? And did you see that Bashar's days were numbered anyway? It was simply a matter of time, maybe not now.
No, I didn't see that actually, that there's a number. Because I didn't know that Turkey would take such a move. And it's essential that Turkey provided the logistical support, the training, the green light, the fact that they will not be seen as terrorists taking over as ISIS, because there's a country that can assure others that this is not going to be an ISIS-type mess. It's going to be more organized, going to be no revenges, no attacks on women, and this, no imposing Sharia law. And this is what we have seen now. All this could not have happened without the Turkish kind of umbrella.
And a different Julani than the one
Yes,
we knew over a decade ago.
Yeah, they produced a different Julani as well, with somebody who was aware of the importance of presenting himself in a different shape and color. So I think this could not have happened without that sponsorship of a state that wants to achieve something rather than simply rebels taking an opportunity to attack weak opponents. And I think the Turks were also important in the war, in the battlefield, not as with boots on the ground, but with drones on the ground and with logistical support on the ground, with information on the ground. So they were vital for this to happen swiftly, and not to get into the kind of day after mess.
Has that been explained yet? Has a lot of details provided?
No, not much really. I mean, the Turks are not doing that. They're happy. They're gloating with what they have achieved. Now they're at the center of things.
Yeah.
Maybe later they would. Maybe they wouldn't, because it might feel better if this is all done domestically. But there are a lot of it done domestically. But it's they were waiting for clearly, many people said that they were asking for this. They felt that the Syrian regime forces are weak, and they asked for an attack on Aleppo. And the Turks did not approve of in the beginning. And then later on, seeing that others are too busy or too weak to come to the support of the regime, realizing that the regime is becoming weaker and weaker. And this might also be, I mean, there's a big debate about sanctions, how effective sanctions are. Because, we have regimes of sanctions that have failed, and we have regimes of sanctions that have succeeded. South Africa is a great example of successful sanctions succeeding. You can speak of Iraq as unsuccessful. You can speak of other places as unsuccessful sanctions. And people start to become weary of sanctions and their effectiveness. And to some extent, I don't agree with this, but sometimes I can see their point. Sanctions without a nudge, without showing that these sanctions are happening by pushing against the regime. Not sanctions alone cannot do the work. Because you might be hollow, as in the case of the Syrian regime, but somebody has to push you to crumble. This is what happened with the Turkish. So you need this kind of external support on top of the sanctions. The sanctions are only a tool to, in addition with other tools, lead to the end of the situation. Now, of course, I mean, I did not You asked me what I was expecting this. I did not expect this.
Well, more the how would you describe the regime's place in the days prior to this rapid success? So was it a did you think of Bashar al-Assad as something that would be permanent in your life?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, I'm not young, so and I I wasn't. He's younger than me, so he would have survived. I mean, look, before the attack, before they started moving into Aleppo and taking over Aleppo in Bling, I was depressed because for a long time, very moments, various state of depression. The first one is when Obama retreated from his threat with his red line to topple the Assad regime after using chemical weapons, and a series of disappointments when the Russians came in after that. Remember, the Russians were not there when he decided not to intervene, and later when they took over Aleppo with all the massive bombardment, barrel bombs, all of the atrocities, and nobody is, people giving up on this. Then came the other disappointment. There was serious attempt to revive Assad with the Emiratis, the Russians, and maybe, I don't know, the Americans, the Israelis were happy with that. Okay, let's get him away from Iran and we can revive him. But they could have succeeded in doing that. I'm very skeptical. I think the Assad regime, with the agreement of Iran, played that role, that he's going to do that, just to revive him, and then he will do whatever he wants to do later on. But they were close. This is my following from people, from reading. They were very close into this kind of arrangement. But this came as a surprise. And maybe there's a link there. Maybe the Turks were not involved in this deal, and they were not happy with the situation with the Kurds in the northeast, and therefore they wanted to do something before this deal is done.
Yeah.
So it was a kind of a goal in the extra time, in the final game of the World Cup for me. And then they scored in the 90th minute. The Hayr al-Sham, HDS, and the Turkish regime, and double this. And I think the Turks were also surprised by how easy it was. They didn't plan for maybe this. They planned just to disrupt the attempt to revive Assad without giving the Turks what they want when it comes to the Kurdish situation. So if you take Aleppo or attack, we can be on the table. They can't ignore our demands. They discovered that not only can take Aleppo, they can take the rest of Syria without sweat. And they changed the situation. So I think they were also surprised to great extent. So they weren't surprised that he could mount an attack and against Aleppo and maybe take Aleppo. They didn't think it would be that easy. The Russians, remember, at the beginning they tried to bomb, but then with the vast advancement, the front has become so big that no matter where they bomb, it will be pointless. In the case of Aleppo, when they were fighting over Aleppo in the past, there were lines, and you can bomb on the other side, and you can help your fighters go in. Now the area is so vast. Where do you bomb? And there's no opponent standing there to take advantage. There are no boots on the ground for the Syrian army who are waiting to take advantage and enter. So it's not like the Russians were not able to fly and bomb, but there was no point of it. There's nobody in the ground to do that, to take advantage of the bombardment and advance. Before that, they were there. Hezbollah, the Iranian militias, everybody was there. And bombardment was useful in that respect. But now, with nothing like this on the ground waiting to take advantage of it, they were basically have to give up. They started bombing a few places. They bombed a hospital, as usual. They like to do that, the Russians. And then they retreated. And I think they talked to the Turkish side, and they understood that that's it, and they were seeing movement on the ground, the super fast advancement of the rebels.
Even Naim Qassem tried to send 2,000 fighters, which added up to really having no input, no effect whatsoever on where Aleppo was moving, and especially that a lot of these fighters, I think, saw exactly what the Israelis are capable of doing across Syria, and it didn't matter. At the end of the day, Israel was going to determine Iran's leverage in Syria. But to go back to really I think I'm understanding from you that it's less Russian and Iranian reluctance, it's more Turkish ambition.
And weakness of the Iranians. But Turkish ambition created it's the new element in the game. Is the Turkish decision.
And that without that kind of, like you described it, a sort of like a final seconds of a match, without that decision, Bashar al-Assad would still be here.
Yeah.
He'd still be in Syria.
With all the effort to revive him. I mean, imagine that Hitler and Nazi Germany lost the countries invaded, but maintained 70% of Germany. And after a time, they put sanctions on him and all of that, but then they realized this is not working. And they said, okay, let's deal with it. Let's accept him as a... It will be so depressing for all the victims to see somebody like him continue to be in power. Maybe curtailed, maybe weakened, maybe supported by other countries, but it is a deeply depressing fact. Had it happened, it would have been a deeply depressing fact. Now, and this is what was going to happen with Assad, who committed atrocities, not as much as Hitler, nobody could, but for Syria it was big. There's a million probably between lost and killed, and of course those who've seen the Caesar photos of the torture, it's horrific. And I know that from people in Syria, a percentage of people have lost people, who have still looking for people after the collapse of the regime, who were life shattered. These are not hand-picked people who are have such stories, but you find them everywhere. So the numbers must be huge of people who suffered during that regime. Of course, not only now during the Assad the father, but after the revolution, they increased massively. And unfortunately, most of those who were arrested and put in prison after the revolution between 2011 and 2018, 2011 and 2018, most of them were killed, arrested, tortured and killed, or arrested and killed because they didn't keep them in prison. The ones you have seen now, most of them were either from before the revolution, who have had sentences and staying there, neglected, nobody thinks about them, or people who were arrested after, when the regime felt more comfortable, could put people in prison without immediately or torturing them and then killing them. So it is a kind of a Holocaust that happened.
This is it's an appropriate segue to go into your most recent piece in Nida al-Watan, which talks about many things, including the references to the worst atrocities in Europe, and I think also identity building in a post-conflict scenario. So I'll give you my take on not just the article you wrote, but also how to compare what happened to Syria to other tragedies in modern history. And I'll also embed the article in the episode's details box. And also to mention, it's a bi-monthly experience. So every 2 weeks, you're producing an article. Is that right? Bi-monthly or, no, sorry, bi-weekly? No.
So far, I'm writing every week almost. But
it's weekly now.
Because of events, not because of my, I'm a procrastinator. So events are pushing me to.
Good. It should be daily. No. So typically it's bi-monthly. I guess that's okay. It's good to have you writing regularly regardless. The take I have from not just your piece, but what happens in general is that I don't think the Assad regime can be naturally compared to other regimes in the region. I think it's better compared to the type of tyranny Eastern Europe went through during the Cold War. And when I thought of Bashar al-Assad's departure, forget that he's not dead. It's the fact that he packs up and flees is something like Nicolae Ceausescu in Romania. That this type of dictatorial, tyrannical security machine that destroys society over time, and even until the last minutes is still scolding his own people for not behaving differently, and runs away flees in a helicopter. Of course, he's killed by a firing squad days later. But that it's the type of suffocation and real damage done that I don't think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think the Egyptians fully experienced, whether it's Mubarak or others. And maybe the Libyans did to a degree under Qaddafi, maybe. But I think of him as among the worst. And when I think of the worst in modern history, I do go back to somebody like Ceausescu, who altered society, he perverted society. I don't think of the Syrian experience as familiar enough to our part of the world.
Well, I'm not experienced enough in the East European situation, but my thinking about it is that it's not as harsh as the Syrian one, but I think the Iraqi one is close to the Syrian one. Saddam was a similarly brutal dictator. He did not have the chance to kill as much as Assad killed, but he would have easily. And he killed a lot, by the way. It's not like he didn't. And I think there are similarities there because unlike East European situation, Assad was ruling with the support of a minority. And Saddam Hussein was ruling with support of a minority. Maybe it's a bigger minority in the Sunnis in Iraq than they are and that changes things. But a tiny minority compared to the number of people in Syria are the Alawites that Assad relies on. When you rely on a minority, you inflate their power and they abuse it. Power corrupts. And power corrupts minorities into abusing it. And the more you abuse it, the more you're scared that the majority will rise up against you. And the more you become brutal, the more you are feared. So it's a cycle of violence and fear that the minority have this. One day, if these people rise up, we are done with. This might not happen, as we will see now, but it becomes a kind of a nightmare. And therefore, you apply more brutality. And this is what happened. The Assad regime committed these atrocities with the help of a Alawite minority who was scared that after all these abuses of power, we are going to be the underdogs. And these Sunni majorities who were abused will not forget that. Now, and this is why you get a kind of levels of violence, of oppression that you don't see in other places. In Egypt, maybe in Romania as well, maybe in other places, it wasn't a minority ruling. There wasn't a community that is behind the dictator as it is in Syria and to some extent in Iraq. When you have this, then you have people who are willing to fight and die and kill, and they have the power because they have the access to the state resources, and they can invite allies like Putin and the Iranian regime to help them. So, and this makes them become nastier than usual. And that's why I think you see this kind of level of oppression. And I thought this from the beginning. I thought demonstrations by themselves will not topple the regime unless somebody intervenes to make sure the regime is not capable of inflicting the suffering of the Syrian people. There will be a lot of suffering and they might lose. And this was my hope that with the Americans and the NATO, everybody who was called upon to come and help. The Syrians were singing to NATO one of the songs in the demonstrations, come on NATO, help us. Bashshar is almost over, but they need that push. Otherwise, they keep on hammering them with barrel bombs and nuclear and chemical weapons till he subdues them completely. And this is what happened. So I think you needed that kind of help to get it. And because the help, in a way, was offered but not delivered, made people assured that they can go and topple the regime, and they exposed themselves even more.
We're talking Obama years.
Period, yeah. And then the help was withdrawn completely, and they left in the cold. And this is why they were butchered, basically. In the same way happened to some extent in Iraq, when although the Americans,
the first Gulf War,
the Americans did not promise the help. That they were there. They defeated Saddam easily in Kuwait. They got him out, and they had an uprising in the south, and they asked for help from the Americans to provide no-fly zone. The Americans provided the no-fly zone for the Kurds, but not for the Shiites in Iraq. And this was a big mistake because, the Saddam went back and killed tens of thousands of Shiites in the south, and they felt that, they were abandoned by the West. And it brought all the years of sanctions, which destroyed the Iraqi society. This could have been avoided had the Americans provided shelter for the no-fly zone for the Shiite as they did in the north. I'm not talking that this would have helped build a democratic, pluralistic society in Iraq, but would have avoided lots of suffering and deaths.
So we will get into the article deeper in a bit, but I want to touch on intervention.
Yeah.
And I think that word is a mixed bag. You get its advocates and its opponents, and sometimes its opponents become advocates depending on the conflict. And we've seen this in Iraq and in Syria. You can have polar opposite reactions depending on when it's happening and why it's happening. I'll give you an example. In my lifetime, I've seen the same people outraged at America's invasion in Iraq become wholehearted champions of intervention in Syria. Or the opposite can be true too. People that did not want intervention in Syria until the uprising happened suddenly demanded too. And we're talking about the Obama years. So I think I'm hearing from you that short of intervention, short of Western intervention, American-led intervention, communal minoritarian rulers would remain in this part of the world. Like Saddam would also be part of our story right now, like Bashshar, or like anyone ruling that way, that communal minoritarian dictatorships are built to last. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
But, well, they didn't necessarily last more than majoritarian ones, but they are brutal when they are threatened, more brutal than majoritarian ones. The people are fighting for it because they think they're fighting for their lives as well, not only for the life of this person.
So there's a legitimacy there that's stronger.
There's a need that's stronger to maintain the ruler. While if Mubarak is toppled and Morsi comes, no community feels that it's about to be attacked now because we're abusing the power of Mubarak. It's not like you have the Coptic community in Egypt ruling Egypt, and they're scared that if they lose, all the Sunni Egyptians will come after them.
Yeah.
So they won't die for. Nobody was willing to die for Mubarak. Because nothing will change. Nobody is scared of revenges. I can see that. Nobody now.
They were scared of Morsi enough to tolerate and legitimize Sisi later.
Yeah, but scared for their lives, scared for the economy, for the rights, especially the middle class, for something like but not really. But in Syria, this was one of the fears. What would happen with Latakia? What happened to the Alawites? What happened to the people who have participated in defending the regime and died for it and killed many Syrians for it? And this fear of revenge is very strong, but it doesn't have to actually materialize. People are scared of things more than they need to, and the things that when the things collapse, they say, "Okay, it's not that bad." People are scared of losing their jobs. Most people who lose their jobs find themselves happier after that. They find other better jobs, or that they weren't happy already with. So people are scared of things that more than they need to. But the fear is very important. One could not undermine that. Should neglect the fear if the fear is not materialized. And it could have materialized. It is nice that the way the rebels behaved in these places were restrained. Still, you see atrocities here and there, acts of revenge, which I wouldn't have imagined things to happen without them. People identify people in the street who have done things to them, to their families, and it's very difficult to restrain them. And I think the level of restraint is quite amazing, given all the bloodshed. And maybe the Syrians are tired by now. Maybe they're really tired, and they want to even get revenge. They just want to be done with the regime. They're so happy that the regime is gone. That's their reward.
So the longevity is not in question. It's more the reaction. The reaction's bloodier, at least in these examples.
Yeah, bloodier. I think longevity is it depends on many factors. But the bloodiness of the regime in fighting against its demise, supported by the community that also scared for itself, becomes torturous.
And beyond Saddam, that example of this type of ruthless reaction to regime survivability, are there any other examples that come to mind? I went to Ceausescu because of his brutality, his crippling effect on society. Is there other examples that come to mind?
Well, I think, of course, you can think of brutality of Stalin as an
So it's up
example.
there with Stalin.
Yeah, I mean the
Yeah.
numbers are not, and the kind of the control of the state, but it wasn't a minority based rule as well.
Yeah,
It was it
exactly.
wasn't
Right.
that. So it was a state, a party doing it,
Yes. Yeah.
and it was done without any communal attachments. You know, they were all scared of Stalin, and he had managed to have that. It's not communally based. In Syria, there is a community that is supportive, and there are other communities that are other minorities that are scared of the majority as well. So, Christians, Armenians, they were a bit reluctant to also
Just come a little closer. Yeah.
yeah, to reluctant to join the revolution, but definitely the main core of people who are fighting are minority in Syria and those who are minorities in Lebanon, like Shiite, who wanted to maintain their dominance. And they felt that if they change the regime in favor of the Sunni majority, would threaten their dominance in Lebanon. And they also did that to maintain their power. And by going in Syria and doing all the stuff they have done, they become even more afraid of losing Syria. So the fact that the regime was toppled down, not because they let the regime topple down, because they couldn't. After few months of being hammered in Lebanon, all their leadership is killed. They lost all the power to fight. And the fact that the Israelis were hammering the Iranians in Syria for some time and intensified those attacks recently. They lost all their generals. They lost a lot of their, what they call advisors there. They become really much weaker as a result of these attacks. We should not underestimate the effect of the attacks in the Israeli attacks in Syria in weakening the Iranian regime.
And not just in recent months, but in terms of years now.
Years and intensified lately in the final months against the Iranian forces or proxies.
So there's, I'm going to save that as well to the end. I want to get into Israel's how Israel behaves with a different Syrian regime, and I'll attach that to Iran at the end. I'm going to jump back to the piece now, which is, and you tell me if I'm reading it the right way. It's abandoning the heartbeat of Arab nationalism for a heart that actually beats better and doesn't die. It's owning what caused a heart attack for a once proud society and building on the pain and owning it, not avoiding it. And the comparison offered in the article does go back to the Holocaust and Germany and Germany's experience. So from there, is that the winning recipe for bringing communities together and forging a healthier Syrian relationship, not just with Syria, but with the region too?
I mean, initially, Syria, kind of a national myth, founding myth, is that Syria is an Arab country. They inherited it from the, King Faisal, who fought the French and lost against them, and Syria that came to the support of Palestinians, that experienced the unification with Egypt at some point as a moment of victory and glory, and then of course, in short time the whole thing collapsed. They never achieved much, but they always positioned themselves as attempting to do these things, to have Arab unity, to help the Palestinians, to fight Israel, to fight imperialism, American imperialism and colonialism. This is what people are taught in schools, against all the evidence sometimes. But this is what they're taught, that this is what Syria is, and this is what the Syrian regime is doing. Because they didn't believe the Syrian regime, but they believed the narrative that this is our place, it's what we should be doing, and the Syrian regime is not doing it properly. Not that we should not have this kind of political consciousness about that this image of ourselves as the beating heart of the Arab world, as the defenders of Arab dignity and Palestinian rights, and all of this is part and parcel of the how Syrians used to see themselves, and you can see that in the old and sometimes young opposition figures. They have this attachment to this image of Syria, but they think the regime wasn't fulfilling that promise.
Yeah.
But I see now that Syria needs and this is what we're trying to argue. This was what we're trying to argue in the article. I see that Syria need a different narrative, a different founding myth, and sometimes not much of a myth and much of a fact. And the founding narrative of the Syrian political identity, national identity, is their suffering. Because they have spent more than 50 years, half a century. This is big. This is a long time for a country that took independence in the 40s. To have 50 years, more than 50 years, being ruled by oppressive regime, which inflicted suffering throughout and humiliation throughout those periods, and intensive suffering in the last since 2011. And if you don't realize that this is how you understand yourself, if this whole suffering will not become the founding narrative behind your new national identity, we are people who suffered. Huh? This is why the comparison with the Jewish experience. It says that we are people who suffered at the hands, in this case, not of the hands of the Gentile, at the hands of other Syrians and people in the region who come to help them. So you have if you see the people celebrating now, this is more of celebration than celebrating end of occupation or colonial power or anything like that. This is emancipation in the real sense. This is the end of slavery of some sort for everybody, and this hasn't been there for a limited time. This has been their story since Assad and a bit before that took over. And if you want to establish the society and understanding of its national identity based on something real and emotionally important, this is not something that you have to inculcate people into. This is their daily experience. They have families, they have lost families, friends, and they have displaced. Half the Syrian people were displaced during the revolution and the civil war that followed. So this should be now the founding narrative of the new Syrian national identity after the fall of Assad. Now they can build their museums, exhibitions, their curricula, their departments based on looking into what happened, documenting it, presenting it to themselves, telling their stories. It's the only way to kind of cure yourself of the wounds, to tell your story. We know that. Your desire for revenge gets for revenge against others, against yourself as well. Sense of humiliation will be cured, or at least attempt to cure it through telling the story publicly. And I think this is what the Syrians should be working on now: is to build society around the suffering of the last half a century and more, and make it the core of their understanding. Of course, there is a problem there, as we were talking about minorities. It is not a fully unifying story, in the sense there is a community that is being part of the oppressors. And at least there are more Sunnis among the oppressed and more Alawis among the oppressors. And this complicates the story. And you have two options. Either you can let the Alawis become victims as well, in a sense. They claim they were victims of the regime who used them for its own purpose and abandoned them at the end of the day. So they can be claimed, because this Alawites' condition were not improved socioeconomically, your average Alawite, but they were given power and they abused that power. But they can say, look, we were deluded, we were abused, we were not abused in the same way the Sunnis were, but we were taken advantage of, and we were used to help the regime's aims, but we didn't benefit from it at all. We suffered. Of course, then they can join the victims, the narrative. You are all part of being victims of the regime. It's not apt, it's not close to the facts as it should be. But, when you build national myth, you sometimes, to create some kind of unity, you ignore some facts. It's not optimal, in my opinion, but maybe that was the only way to allow the Alawites to claim victimhood. And now this is what they're doing now. They're coming out and saying, we were not happy with the regime. We were also afraid and all of that. People tend to want to not question them. As long as they are attacking the regime, they're happy with that. So if they join the narrative of the victims, that could be one option. The other option is to admit they were victims to some extent, but they were also victimizers, and adopt the kind of German attitude towards the Nazi history, not as we were all victims, in the same way the Austrians did. They claimed to be victims, but they were not really victims. They were, like part of the project. The Germans admit or say, we are not victims, we are victimizers. Maybe some of us were leading this and deserve to be punished through legal means, but others, the rest of it, were implicated in it. They acquiesced in it. They didn't oppose it as much as they should, and therefore they were guilty of it. And this is how the narrative in Germany is presented. Of course, could this happen in Syria? Could the Alawites admit guilt and be part of the narrative as the guilty who are admitting, and then this way they will share the narrative of the majority. They will share the narrative itself of the oppression, but they will take a different position. In this case, they are not the victims; they are the guilty victimizer. But they are admitting that by admission, you have a kind of truth and reconciliation. You have somebody take, okay, I did that, I regret it, and I'm admitting it, and the victim becomes, the victim wants recognition from the victimizer. That's what they want. If they get the recognition, the need for revenge becomes weaker, especially with time. So those are the two options. Either you join Syria in the narrative of victimhood, which is true of the majority but might not be true of everybody, or you have this two attitudes to the same narrative. One is the attitude of a victim, and one is a victimizer who is regretting and telling the truth in hope of reconciliation. So, but I think this should be if one wants to build a national identity for Syria, it has to go through these channels. It's no longer fighting imperialism and liberating Palestine and unifying the Arab world, because these were exactly the narratives that the Syrian regime used to oppress the Syrian people. And maybe this would be part of their curriculum, and maybe they should have, you've seen the footage from Sadnaya and all this. As you do with the visits to Auschwitz, you should have visits to Sadnaya and to Tadmor, to other prisons, other facilities for security facilities for the regime where they used to put people arrested. They should have, this is part of the rituals of school students, to go there and visit these sites, to become part of their identification as Syrians, that we are the people who suffered through these.
The way you're describing that forced identity, the last times that I went to Syria regularly was over 20 years ago. And my childhood was often through Syria to get to Lebanon when the airport was closed or Lebanon was divided. So my memories of Syria go back to the 80s and really until the early 2000s. And I stopped going regularly after that. But it was always, you would get to the moment you entered Syria and the moment you even approached something that was government related, it was the Syrian and the Palestinian flag together. It was almost like a reminder that we're carrying the Palestinian cause. We're the rightful resistance. And it was clear even back then that they are probably the most cautious and perhaps even to a degree calculated vis-a-vis the Palestinian cause and vis-a-vis Israel, that there was deliberate silence on the Syrian Golan Heights border. They would never open Syria to further conflict with Israel. They would use Lebanon for conflict with Israel. And also that the Palestinian cause, what cause are they talking about? I mean, this was the most cruel regime when it comes to Palestinians, whether they're in Sadnaya, whether they're dead. More recently in Yarmouk, or for that matter in Lebanon. So the Syrian regime abused the Palestinian cause. And I agree with you fully that this forced acceptance of Arabism, it's almost a more demented, more outrageous version of anything Nasser ever wanted. It's almost taking it so far and so extreme that they're willing to destroy a country on the way. I don't think Nasser was ever in that. I don't think he could imagine the type of cruelty that Hafiz and Bashar did to Syria. But that said, what you're describing, I think, is really the most hopeful outcome, that Syria learns from mistakes that it might make in the coming stretch and ends up in a place that they can visit Sadnaya and learn from it, the way Germans visit all of their old SS facilities, or you can even go into them and see how Germans tortured Germans. And you're right also that it's not just Alawites who were part of the regime. There were Sunnis too that are, and actually Damascus took its time. Even during the revolt, during the early stages of the revolt, it never really participated. That's also very important.
I'm making generalizations here
Sure,
because
yeah.
they are true generalization, but doesn't cover everybody.
Yeah.
And they are classes that were co-opted and willingly with the regime.
Yeah.
So it's not, and there are many Alawites who were opposing. But if we talk about generally, if we look at the community
Yeah.
from bird's eye view, there is a kind of generality that's true. It's not a universal, but it is applicable to a great extent.
Sure.
But I want to say something about, one thing about flags. I wasn't being good about flags, but I think the Ba'ath flag and the Palestinian flag are very similar. So you might have.
No.
It was the Palestinian one. Okay.
No, I'm talking literally.
Yeah.
Next to the Syrian flag, the
yeah,
Palestinian
yeah,
flag,
yeah.
always.
No, but you see, the irony is that regimes like the Assad regime and many other Arab regimes, they use that rhetoric, and they teach in schools that this is what we are here for, to fight the imperialist Zionist conspiracy against us, to liberate our land, all that. And people start to endorse these aims and to think these are the most important aims. And then they see the regime is not achieving them, and they criticize the regime for not achieving
For
those
not living
aims
up to its
to its propaganda.
Right.
And unfortunately, it becomes genuinely their identity. They think of themselves as, like their mission in life is to liberate their land and to kick out the invaders and to, fight the colonial legacy. And this is why many Syrians were very reluctant to support intervention, even when they needed it, because they felt this goes against what they are, brought to think of as something horrible. So the regime succeeds in inculcating these values or these ambitions, and then fails to achieve them, and therefore seen as failure. But they still believe in those aims. What Syria needs now is to abandon those aims.
Right. No.
Not to abandon those narratives of national unity. What makes us Syrians? What identifies us as Syrians? What identifies us as Syrian now is the legacy of suffering, of oppression. That is so present in the minds and hearts of Syrians. Is to establish your narrative, national narrative, on something else, is to be deluded to a great extent, and to maybe put yourself on a path on repeating the same experience, because only by exposing this, presenting it in the daylight, and people live it in their education, in their art, in their museums, in the political narrative. Only if they do that, you can ensure that will not happen again. As you say, never again. Never again in Syria can be achieved if you put that at the core, what happened during the last 50 years, at the core of your political imagination.
In that light, I want to push back a bit, not as I don't necessarily believe this myself, just trying to give the critics of what is happening, not their moment, but trying to see if there's anything to gain from a bit of what they're saying. And some of it I share in the more sophisticated sense that political Islam doesn't attract me. And seeing anything religious in this occasion is a turnoff to me. and I do know this for a fact, that I think the average Damascene, or for that matter, the middle class of Syria, what remains of it, and this extends to all groups in Syria, that this is not really what this revolution was about. And Joulani does not reflect the average Syrian. He reflects an opposition fighter, a rebel, and somebody that's able to reform on the way from being very extreme in ideology to being pragmatic enough, to being actually probably the kind of person you want, being that voice. But I doubt Syria will end up a cosmopolitan society now. I see it as going through a difficult transition. So that's on one side. Political Islam is not my cup of tea. And I say that knowing that it's unlikely that there will be a better secularism now. The second thing, and this again is not something I necessarily subscribe to, but it is true that alongside with the Israeli bombings of Iranian assets and Iranian infrastructure and a lot of Hezbollah targets in Syria over the last decade, that there's also been a preemptive land grab by the Israelis, at least on the Syrian side of what was the buffer zone. And I think even until today, the Israelis are making decisions that make sense for them, entering Syrian territory further than the Golan Heights, at least the way the marker was before. And it seems like the Israelis they don't care about the reaction to those decisions. And occasionally you do see Syrian voices emerging, bringing up these factors as consequential, that look at what's happening now. Now, I'm not going to level Israeli movement on the Golan Heights with 54 years of brutality by the Assad regime. And clearly the Syrians deserve to rejoice. And what Israel is doing should not dominate what Syria went through. But is there anything there in terms of Syria finding itself as not necessarily a battlefield any longer, but a different place that may not appeal to the more independence-minded Syrian, the more cosmopolitan-minded Syrian, that Syria turns into something that doesn't resemble maybe what Syrians wanted when they first rose up?
Yeah, look, there are two questions here. One is the nature of the rebels as Islamists and their history and the past history of their leader as well, and what kind of society will emerge. And the other is the Israeli threat, how to deal with that. But if you think of the first one, which is the one that's dominant in the minds of people, definitely this is a source of worry. It's not a worry that can in any way reduce the joy of the collapse of the regime, because it's now that you can start doing something. There's a hope of doing something. Before that, there was no history. It was a dead country. Now it's alive. Would it be able to run or use walkers? But it is alive again, and things can happen. If they do the right things, maybe they can run. Maybe they can fly even. But maybe not. But it will be a long journey that is influenced by all kinds of things, including what the region wants, because the region has and the world wants the pressure from and the support from the West, the pressure and the support from the countries in the region, the surrounding countries and countries in the region. All of these are factors. So far, there are signs of optimism and signs of alarm as well. I mean, would these people who managed to topple the regime let go of the power? Would they allow? And for me, it's more important to allow democracy before you get into the lifestyles of people. I think democracy is important. If you allow people for debate, for objections, for having opposition parties, rather than unified Islamists that group or whatever group, Islamists or non-Islamists, who don't allow for opposition. That's the first test. The test is, do you have genuine elections and genuine political life that can evolve with time? That's the first test. The second test is how open-minded to the life choices of others. how they can accommodate and accept different conceptions of a good life in that society. And it's very important, of course, and sometimes they go together. The democracy and pluralism, they are not pluralism not only in terms of political pluralism but also in lifestyle
Sure,
pluralism.
yeah.
I mean, I for myself,
Do they though? In this part of the world, Lebanon is the anomaly for that. That mixture too, and it doesn't work when it's under immense pressure. But this cohabitation of pluralism and democratic norms, Lebanon is the only country that managed.
the threat in the country here is from communal voting and communal politics. You have this in Lebanon. It's a problem. It's a problem in Iraq. Maybe it's less of a problem in Syria because there is a clear dominant majority. You don't have communal gains out of
Right.
identification with the community, except when you have dictators supporting, like in the case of Assad, a particular community. So in a way, I see the threats because Syria is a conservative in general society, especially in the rural areas, and they can easily be taken over by conservative values, political parties that carry conservative values. But I think there's a task that is now in front of whoever going to rule Syria, a huge economic task of reviving the country. And you cannot do that unless you open up, unless you encourage tourism, unless you encourage investment in the country. You cannot do it on your own, and people in Syria want to see a better country, including those with conservative values. These are not radical people, just have they can live with no alcohol in the country, but they wouldn't do it because they think that it's not good for investment, for tourism, for acceptability in the world, also for their image. So in a way, I see that the pressures that are going to be put on whoever is going to rule Syria from the groups that are now managed to topple the regime is going to be big enough to steer it away from the worst version of the Islamist party, and they can get to a much nicer version of it, which allows them to could allow them to evolve themselves into something else. So, I mean, for me, I like a country that has complete openness. I would like to see, I don't know, not only alcohol allowed and emancipated women who can.
No,
equal,
those
I
are
also
very-
I also like to have gay marriages in Syria. So it's not like my agenda is much.
No, I'm thinking more the ability to allow Christians that fled Syria in the last 10 years to go back and not think about it, or for that matter, the few Druze villagers that maybe are thinking now Israeli citizenship might be better than something like Julani, and they're not big in numbers, but they do make the rounds. But sorry, I'll just add one more thing, Bashshar. Also, the average Syrian who doesn't want in my mind, Syria is closer to Lebanon in that sense than other countries. That there's a inherent pluralism that was robbed from them long ago, through war, through regime changes, and then suddenly a very militant-like dictatorial stretch of time. But I think of that as it's not so much the women or the gay marriage or even alcohol. It's communities can live comfortably with each other, and individuals can express themselves freely. I don't know if that's possible.
Okay, there are two things here.
Yeah.
One is the social agenda of the new guys. This is what I was thinking about. The other one is the communal cohesion.
Yeah.
And this is the Lebanese problem. It's not
Yeah.
also as
It's
well.
true.
And,
Yeah.
and it's sectarianism that is a problem, not the social agenda. And I think so far it doesn't seem to be going in a bad direction. There is no threat from the minorities. And so the majority doesn't feel that it has to actually oppress them. And there is no hope now for the minorities to regain their position of power as they did under especially the Alawite minority in the Syrian regime. So there isn't this threat. I don't think there's a threat of actually ethnic or sectarian cleansing of any sort. Now, we might be afraid of communities being marginalized politically. by sheer voting, they could be marginalized politically. In the same way, maybe they might flourish in other ways, but they're still marginalized politically. In the same way that the Coptics are marginalized politically, but they might flourish by being successful in business. I don't know much about the facts, but in a way, I don't see this kind of rule which would prevent Syrians, Christian Syrians from coming back or from staying. Would they feel their voice reflected in politics? Definitely more than the Syrian regime would allow anybody to have their voice reflected in politics. This is totally absent. I think we have hope now for the Syrians to have their voice reflected in that, to have some level of say, at least in the municipalities, if not in their general parliamentary elections, if not also in their desire to have a kind of way more open liberal social agenda. But it is going to be difficult, like in the case of Lebanon. What do you do with the minority? How do you make sure the minority is not marginalized? Would you put quotas in the parliament for minorities? Would you do some decentralization? All of this is open. And I don't think which one would be the adopted one, but definitely it will not be an oppression against minorities. It might not be the optimal representation of minorities, but it will not be an oppression. And of course, when you talk about the Druze wanting to, scared they wanted to, I think, frankly, the case of the Druze, they see that Druze communities in Israel are not doing badly. So it's not like an escaping to hell. They're not escaping if they decide to leave, and I don't think this is the case.
I don't think even that this will materialize further than just...
Even then, I could understand that demand. Because
so it's more like Ghajar in Lebanon, that the Lebanese...
why would you join your communities on the other side? You have health insurance, you have access to schools, you have stability. Why should you join? And it's also a way of bargaining. Say, look, we are going to join the others who are going to have a better offer. If you don't deal with us, so these communities are going to bargain with the help of whatever tools they have, whatever arguments they put on the table, but the Alawites they can't leave somewhere else.
So on the other side of it,
they have to have a different bargaining position.
On the other side of it, meaning that, let's say, with the exception of these few Druze villagers, maybe that have shared their views recently on that, the Assad regime, with its departure, that comfort the Israelis had on the border seems to have disappeared too. There's no indication that there's going to be conflict anytime soon between the new regime in Syria, whatever it turns into later, and Israel. But this kind of land grab and the brazen way that Netanyahu even said that they're making their decisions without any consequence whatsoever, how do you allay the fears of people that still feel that the Israelis will go as far as they need to achieve their security needs? And what we've seen is also a violation of Syrian territory.
I mean,
let alone the Golan Heights, which is still occupied.
I mean, let's look at it from the point of view of the Israelis, and let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's do that. Let's try to do that. What would be kind of the most acceptable reasoning? Doesn't have to accept it, but it's the least dangerous one. That they see a situation unfolding. These are Islamists who could turn at any point into carrying an anti-Israeli slogan to gain legitimacy within the Syrian society. And we want to make sure that they don't have access to weapons that can be threatening, especially chemical weapons. And this is the one scenario. The other scenario is that they might have stability and they want to negotiate the Golan Heights again as a stable country. It was now demanding they want to have a peace deal.
Negotiate, meaning like what they used to do with the Syrians under Farouk Shara, that kind
negotiate and get, it's look, we have a legitimacy, we have international law, and we are now wanting to have peace.
Right.
Look, Assad did not want to have peace because they would lose legitimacy of the enemy that is fighting.
Right.
What if they decide to have peace and come and say, And this scared the right wing in Israel, and maybe not even the right wing, but definitely the right wing in Israel. Netanyahu is, of course, in the head of that, and they want to make sure that we're not going to give up. That's why they now approve expansion of settlement there.
Doubling the settlement population.
They want to create facts on the ground that would not make it possible for, and this is very dangerous, of course. And the danger is, one danger is not to settle this, not to have a peace. The other one is for the Syrians to go back to the rhetoric of the regime that our main mission is to liberate the Golan Heights.
No, for them it was liberate Palestine. The Golan Heights, we will not talk about that.
But this is a footnote. They claim that. In fact, they claim that they have liberated it in 73, which is a big lie. So this is something which Assad was saying, okay, we'll never negotiate, we'll never accept a deal, we'll never get every inch of the land. And even when they offered them every inch of the Golan Heights, he refused to take it because he lives on that agenda. The most dangerous thing for the Syrian people is to repeat that agenda. I worry more about how people are living and whether they can live a flourishing life with political rights protected and human rights as well in the case of Gaza, more than which state they happen to fall under.
That's for Syrians, and that's maybe for
I'm saying what I would think, what I think in general. So this kind of...
It's quite telling. Syrian Druze are very adamant about their Syrian identity even until today.
That's their choice.
And Syrians across the border that may want now to, out of fear, to be under Israeli rule. I don't know if that's a good reason enough for them to just roll in. In other words, I think what I was trying to point at is that it shows you also the other end, which is the Assad regime was so quiet and so careful not to bother the Israelis too much. And it just shows you how the war, this liberation, this resistance jargon was really smashed on us. And I want to wrap it up with Lebanon and what we've been through.
Can I add something to the
Sure.
I think if Syria becomes a stable democratic country, the issue of peace, the problem with peace, will then become the problem from the side of Israel. It becomes then that. Would you have a constituency for land for peace again? Now we don't have a constituency for that. And the right-wing government in Israel are trying to change facts on the ground now in Golan Heights that they'll not even be able to do that in the future, even if the constituency for peace is there. So I think this is my fear now is from the Israeli side. Not now. If Syria becomes a stable and country and normal country and demands its rights in the Golan Heights, the problem will be, I see it, is the Israeli refusal. My argument, in case this happens, what should be the Syrian response? Should they go back to holding everything and rallying the country behind that kind of flag? I think this will not be the best thing to do.
I think that's fairly said. That's a great way of also showing how you can pressure the Israelis long term, and to also returning. At the end of the day, I agree with you. People matter more than you should put people above cause as well. And if anything, the Palestinian cause was not about people at the end. It was about Iran. And I'm going to try to bring all of this back to Lebanon, because all of that hell that we've been put under, it's just weeks before Assad's departure. And we lived through this. We saw the end of Hassan Nasrallah through war. Hashim Safiuddin killed days later. Naim Qasim, wherever he is, no longer a serious contender for anything other than disappointing speeches. The entire communication structure severed. Most of their weapons destroyed or neutralized. They're no longer a real threat against Israel. We also lived through a year of watching Hezbollah join a unity of arenas and by and large commit suicide as Iran's most important asset. That is weeks before Assad leaves Syria. And up until today, you still have a group that can shelter regime figures, as they've done in the last days. You can have a group that is still involved, not involved in military ways. Hezbollah is still an armed group. Hezbollah remains a militia. And even though the ceasefire seems to be working, even though 1701 is taking hold, we're still far from completely loosening Iran's grip on Lebanon. I would argue Syria too. It's too early to tell exactly how Iran responds. It may respond from a far weaker position, but I don't think it's over yet for Iran's ambitions in the region, primarily Lebanon. So I'd like to end it there. Do you think that it's over?
It's not over in the sense that one should just simply this. We've got what we want now, and we don't have to worry about this. No, we have to worry about this. We have to worry about the Iranians rebuilding themselves, regaining their power again. Because there are many factors that are going to prevent them from this. One is their defeat, recent defeat, their change of regime in Syria, which is a huge impediment. And of course, the Israelis' posture that we're not going to allow you to come back. And that is, they seem to be serious this time about it. All of these things make it very unlikely. But they will still try to at least regain part of their pre-war now, their current war posture within the internal politics.
Within internal politics, yeah.
And then maybe they do something with it. They want to kind of salvage whatever they can salvage. And that's understandable, but I don't think they can salvage much. They can't regain their previous position by any stretch of imagination. And I think one can be assured of that. Of course, one has to see what's happening in Syria, to see to what extent they will not be able to even to sabotage the change in Syria, which I also think it's unlikely given the interest in the region in it, especially the Turks and the others who are interested in stability. They might have their own agenda, but they are interested in stability as well. I think it's very unlikely. You'll see now the attempts to not totally dissolve as groups, to maintain some level of presence, especially that they have already parliamentary presence that is significant based on the gains they had before.
Yeah.
And we're not sure they can maintain anything like that in the if not the next election, the elections after. They might have solidarity, Shia solidarity, because of their loss in the next elections. That's a possibility, but it might start to weaken once they realize it's not a disaster. We don't have Hezbollah and the weapons anymore, but we are okay. That's what they will see later, and then they become interested in other things, in the economy, in the rebuilding, rather than maintaining the hegemony that Hezbollah with their weapons provided them with. So I think I'm optimistic in that regard. In this regard, doesn't mean that one should just simply give up, because they were trying to push. With the elections, they're trying to push for a candidate that reflects their old power, rather than reflects the new situation. And we have to push for that. And this is to make the transition faster, reflecting the changes. You have to push back against their attempt to behave as if, against the Hezbollah's attempt to behave as if nothing has happened. But they know something has happened, and they will react to that, and we can have something that doesn't. It's not an attempt to in a way show them you have lost in their face, but as much as when show them that things have changed, and now we don't want to take advantage of your loss, but we don't want you to behave as if nothing happened. That's the kind of. So we need a fair deal, and the fair deal, for the example, at the level of the presidential elections, is to have a president that has the approval of the Christian community. That should be the priority now, to make sure that we have a balance, and the Sunni prime minister who has the approval of the Sunni majority in the country, and then they can, of course, have a Speaker of the House that gets the approval of the majority of the Shia. Have this kind of balance. Maybe you need to have a new Ta'if later, given the changing situation. But that's further down the line. Yeah.
So in other words, whatever happens, the Hezbollah that flourished with Iranian support, in a security sense, will no longer be able to cripple Lebanon in any way that resembles recent history, but that their role in politics will thrive, and it may fail, it may succeed depending on how they play politics in a local sense. But you don't worry about Iran trying to circumvent what's happened in Syria and trying, at least to what Naim Qasim is alluding to, is that they will get their weapons somehow.
Look, I worry, and given the experience, one should worry. No?
Short of their disarmament.
Yeah, because they're adamant and they are resourceful. Am I, do I think this is easy for them to do? No, but one should worry. No? One should not, take a break now and we've won, let's go on a vacation. No, this is another struggle, but it's an easier one than before, much easier than one before.
Do you think of it as wrapping up with the disarmament of the group in the near future?
Yes, it will happen, and I think we have to see what happens to the Iranian regime itself and how things unfold in Syria. So this could not have been better from that perspective.
Then let me take it all the way to Iran. Maybe it's too early to tell, but going back to the beginning of the conversation, the domino effect, if it happens in Iraq, do you think it happens by default? Does it happen to Iran? Will we see the end of the Iranian regime as it currently exists?
Look, I'm not an expert in Iran with any sort of imagination, but many people, Iranians I know and people who know the Iranian situation, would think that the crossing point would be when Khamenei dies or unable to rule.
Oh, but that could be any time now.
Anytime, yeah. So that would be, and if Iran external project is seen to be a failure, and therefore the Visionary Guard who are spearheading leading that effort are seen as failures. This opens big cracks inside the regime, and this opens possibilities for this time genuine elections, actually, where people can win elections if they run on a genuine reformist platform, not a fake one, not a domesticated one. This could happen. Maybe they won't be able to oppress and arrest demonstrators, put them in prison and torture them and execute them later. This would be doesn't have to be a revolution. All you have to do is allow for elections to run normally and not eliminate candidates from the beginning because of the pressure.
But Iran was never about elections. Iran has its elections, and you have these reform-minded, regime-tolerated people coming and going. I'm talking really the way Iran navigated the region to suit what. It's not national interest. It's regime survival.
Yes, but let me tell you something about elections. Elections are no longer in Iran a way, and they have never been a way of changing things, except 2009.
I think it was hyped up.
But they oppressed. They were oppressed. I mean, I don't.
Post Green Revolution.
Yeah, but after that, this reformist tag becomes only cover up for the regime.
Yeah.
After the 2009.
Technically, the current president is a reform-minded president, but that's meaningless.
Yeah. So the elections became a danger to the Iranian regime, and this shows itself in 2009. Therefore, they decided to basically ignore the votes of the people and put those who object in prison. That was that. And since then, we don't have elections. Don't play a role. But if I can see that if the regime is weakened, you don't need a revolution in the sense people are toppling the regime and burning statues and pictures and toppling statues. You don't need to do that. Maybe through a smoother way of having genuine. This time, the elections are not simply a show; become a reality. and gradually you see a changing policy based on understanding that something different has happened in the region, and now they can no longer operate the way they are. They lose legitimacy, the revolutionary legitimacy they had so far. So this could be the best scenario for Iran. But I would say that they'll be occupied with the internal struggle to the extent they were not able to regain the losses they had, because it will be difficult to regain them, even if they are in the best shape. They might not be in the best shape, especially that sanctions might continue and be strengthened under Trump, and there might be a strike by Israel on Iran. People are talking about that. All of these elements would make the regime look bad in front of its people. You have failed abroad, you've unable to defend us against possible attacks, and you have not able to be lifted the sanctions. So all the promises, all the hopes of the Iranian people will be shattered, and they will not see the regime as strong and capable because of their losses abroad. And if they're unable to defend the country against attacks, I think this is the best moment for a change of regime or regime behavior.
I've known you for a long time, and I think I've been deemed quite pessimistic when I'm interviewed on various outlets, and I don't have much positivity to share. But in the last few days, when I've been asked to comment, I've noticed my own tone changed, and even people have told me I'm less pessimistic than usual. A friend of mine just the other day said, "You're usually boomy in everything," and I didn't realize that until I went on BBC over the weekend, and I actually said, no, I'm hopeful for the future. I don't think I've ever heard you too optimistic. Even when things warrant it, I have never heard you optimistic until the last time I saw you before the Assad regime and tonight. So I'm happy to see someone that I admire and able to think through this problem and see things clearly, have an optimistic tone. It means, I think, one should be optimistic, even when things can be complicated and difficult in this journey. I think it's okay to celebrate and to be hopeful. And it reminds me, the last time I felt this was early 2005, when there was something in the air that the Syrian regime was on its way out of Lebanon, and that the Syrian regime has left Syria too, 20 years later or so. I think it's okay to be smiling on the streets of Beirut, and especially in Damascus and across Syria. So,
I think, it's
holiday spirit, holiday cheer.
You have to always take optimism with a grain of salt, a big one here in this region. So, but you shouldn't. There are a few moments that you can feel happy, and you should grab them, before they vanish.
Before they bite you where it hurts. Yeah. Bashshar Haydar, Merry Christmas, and thank you. And I really appreciate all of this.
Listening to this.
Thanks to you.
Thanks a lot.